Be anybody. Many would say that they know a person. If you had to ask them who their hero was, they personally knew a person, and that they consider as their hero. And that might be a parent or a grandparent, or aunt or uncle, or just somebody that has inspired you to do greater things. And then there's other people in the past that you look in the past. That did something that's gone down in history as a true hero. Most, I think, would probably say that Jesus is on that list. I mean, and rightfully so. He's the ultimate hero in history. He created the world, and he died for us and made a way for us and saved us. So yes, he's a hero. But if you looked at outside of that and you just started looking at people just in history, if I looked at someone in history that I looked up to, I would say one of mine that I've been inspired by was actually the life of a man by the name of Oskar Schindler. Oskar Schindler was a man who was born in 1908. He was an ethnic German from, I hate trying to pronounce this, Sudetenland, what is now Czechoslovakia, and he had some failed business ventures as a young man. He was actually a womanizer, and he loved the life of luxury. In 1935, he joined a pro-Nazi party and became a spy for the German military intelligence. He was caught, he was convicted of espionage, and he was sentenced to death. However, before he was executed, Germany managed to annex Sudetenland, which with it came a pardon from the Reich for Oskar Schindler. So in 1939, he went to Poland and he secured the lease of an enamelware factory. And through his connections and bribery, he staffed it ultimately with Jewish slave labor. Now, you might be saying, Pastor, why would a man like this be someone you admire? Well, because of what happened next. It's an inspiration for people like me that has a dark past. I do have a past, and it's not very bright. God calls people that have pasts, just so you know, many times. He calls everybody that follows Him, but He does call people with a dark past. And so it was there in Poland that he apparently ended up having some kind of a change of heart for the Jewish people under his care. The Jewish people that he had there was staffed from a concentration camp near there, and they were living in brutal, harsh conditions. People were being put to death, and all kinds. It was during the Holocaust. All kinds of terrible things were happening, harsh treatment, and they had to endure all this. So he set up a camp for his workers, where they could be treated humanely. They didn't have to live in that concentration camp. And he often even arranged for Jewish workers that would be immediately executed for some hindrance in their abilities. They were deemed people that couldn't be essential for the war effort. But he would give them a spot in his factory, and it deemed them essential for the war effort in his factory. And his motive, you might still say, well, of course, he's taking care of the people who's taking care of him. He's just trying to keep them healthy and everything. And you might be able to question that at this point. But we see clear evidence of his changed mindset with what happens next. And this is a true story. When his factory was decommissioned in 1944, he successfully petitioned to have his workforce moved from his home near his hometown there for a new factory. And with this, he had a vast amount of wealth that he obtained during his enamelware factory. And what he did was he took that money and he bought his list of Jewish workers. Well, you might have seen the movie called Schindler's List. That's where the list comes from. He had a list of people that he bought. Then he moved and he housed and he cared for the men, women, and children on his list, and they worked in his new factory, and he did it at his own expense. And they worked there in this new factory, not making pots and pans and enamelware, but they were making munitions for the German war machine. You say, that don't sound very good. Well, that's when it becomes very obvious, and this is a true story. He was no longer driven by wealth that he might achieve from slave labor. Instead, we find that he was no longer supportive of the Nazi Party and the war, because all of his munitions that he made in that factory were rigged to fail. None of them worked. And he saw to it that's what happened. Isn't that kind of funny? On May 8, 1945, the war ended and he was labeled as a war criminal. He and his wife had to flee to avoid captivity with the help from the very Jews that he saved. They helped him escape. And it brings me a lot of inspiration because even though he started off bad, and I'm not saying he was a Christian or anything like that, I don't know, but even though he started off bad, he was given the fortune that he so desired to be able to live a life of luxury and what he craved, and he could have done that, but instead he gave it all up to care for and save a helpless group of people that everybody hated, that had no hope. He became selfless, and he changed the course of the war in his corner of the world. Now, this defining act that he did broke him. It ruined him financially for the rest of his life. He lived out he tried some other business adventures, but he failed. He never could get anything off the ground. And ultimately, towards the end of his life, he ends up relying upon the contributions that were given to him from these very same grateful Jews that he'd saved. They took care of him. He died broke, a broke businessman, but he was buried with honor on Mount Zion in Israel. To this day, he's honored in Israel for his change of heart and his sacrifice. The Jews have this thing that they do when they place when they want to remember or honor somebody. And Jody, you can go ahead and get that picture up if you would. And they take a stone and they set on the top of their grave. It's a stone of remembrance. And they don't want to put flowers on there because they want them to understand the symbol is that they are what they are remembered for as long as that stone is in existence. You are remembered is what it means. It's an act of respect and honor for a person who is now deceased. And that is Oskar Schindler's grave right there. You can see all the stones. Oskar Schindler's grave is constantly piled with stones of the people, even to this day, who remember the 1,098 people that were on his list that he brought from the gas chamber so they might live. I think it's a good thing. I think it's somebody you could admire, somebody that can be so bad and end up doing so much good. Last week, I started a series I titled The Rest of the Story, The People That God Raises Up. And the reason for this series is to examine some of what we call the heroes of our faith. I know we don't necessarily usually label people in the Bible a hero, but I've read some commentary that one writer writes, and he's always calling these guys our heroes of our faith. And he's right. They're somebody we look up to and we admire and we preach about. They're the people that we preach about the great things that they did, and they inspire us to do things and to live for God in a way that we might not have before. We read their stories and preach about them all the time. And so often when we do this, when we read or we think about them, we see them through rose-colored glasses. We see the good in everything that they've done. And when we do this causes us to see them as people of greatness that we cannot achieve for our own lives. Now, I'm preaching these messages today, or these messages I'm preaching, in an attempt to remove those rose-colored glasses. And it's not to dishonor them in any way. I want you to understand that. On the contrary, I want to use this to inspire you, to celebrate the mercy of God, to show grace that He showed in their lives, and whenever He overlooked their flaws. God's mercy that was just as powerful there for them is just as powerful for us today. As a matter of fact, Paul tells us in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 4, and this is in the middle of a thought, but it states a fact. But God is so rich in mercy, and He loved us much. Some people call money, jewels, precious stones, real estate, riches. But Paul calls God's riches mercy. He's rich in mercy. It's part of His wealth. He's got tons of it, which means there's still plenty to go around for all of us. So the fact is, our Bible heroes were great because of the mercy that God had to show, that He had to show grace, because they were just people like we are. They had their struggles just like us. But their struggles is not what defined them. And your struggles that you have don't have to define you either. The first week we talked about the great and faithful servant Noah. And I feel like we showed that Noah was a man like any other guy, not like every other guy, but many other men or women that had a temper at times. And in his anger, he wasn't always fair. Anybody ever say anything that you shouldn't have said in your anger? In his anger, he said things that were completely wrong. And there were things that he could not get back after he said them. That's the problem with a word. Once it's out, you can't take it back. It's already out. If it falls on ears, it gets repeated and repeated and repeated, and there's no end. There's a saying, a quote, but the person who quoted it is unknown, but its profound wisdom says, don't mix bad words with your bad mood. You'll have many opportunities to change your mood, but you'll never get the opportunity to replace the words you spoke. So regardless of his shortcomings, God took an ordinary, flawed man and He saved everything. God doesn't see Noah as somebody who shoots off at the mouth when he gets angry, but He uses him instead and recognizes him as a type of Christ, who's the Savior of all men, that get on board. That's what the ark is used as a type of salvation, and it was all men's salvation and animals at one time. And that's how God remembers him and sees him. Last week we examined the father of our faith, which was Abraham. This is the guy who left the life of security and luxury to follow God because he had faith in Him. He believed God. He did this without any Bible, without any preacher telling him. He just did this because that's what God impressed upon him. People probably thought he was a lunatic. He couldn't say, well, the Bible says this. No, he was in the process of being the beginning of the Bible there, living that life. So he became the forefather of the nation of Israel that God promised to fulfill His promise to bless all of humanity. And I know that there's some differences of opinion about the nation of Israel. If you study what they've meant to the world, they actually have blessed the entire world. The Jews have done all kinds of things that advanced us. But even if you can't get on board with that, you have to admit that Jesus is from the lineage of Israel, and that was God's plan, and He has blessed all mankind through Jesus Christ. So even with this great man of faith, we see him lose his faith at times. He didn't always, we think of him being a pillar of faith, never wavering, but we've seen that he did at times. And he took matters into his own hands, just like any one of us might do. Any one of you all start praying, or you're waiting on God and you say, if it's going to be, it's up to me, and just step out and do it. I've done that and ended up in many messes. So he ends up lying about who his wife really is because of fear that led him ultimately to allowing his wife to be taken by two different kings for their wife. That's a pretty pitiful thing to do. And he did this because he stepped out of the will of God. The first time was whenever he went down to Egypt, and God did not tell him to go down to Egypt. And I just want to point out our main focus of that message was stepping out of the will of God leads to fear and ultimately compromise. It does every time. Yet God continually honors him throughout Scripture because that's not how God sees Abraham. He sees the father of faith, the father of Israel. Today I want to go to another big Bible personality who is Moses, the great Moses. But let me give you a little bit of backstory because we're going to jump from Abraham to Moses. And for anybody that may not be familiar, Abraham, did get that son that God promised. That is a son of his old age, and Sarah was I can't remember the exact age, in her 90s, but can you imagine being that old and having a child? That'd be rough, I think. It'd be really rough. So he has that child, and Isaac, the promised one, had a son named Jacob. Jacob, who was later named Israel, had 12 sons from 4 wives. He wasn't very smart. That's all I can say. I've got one. That's enough. I don't need any more. They became the 12 tribes of Israel. It was a family of dysfunction. And one of these days I'm going to preach a whole message on a series on the patriarchs because I think it's fascinating how God takes something that's all jacked up and redeems it. Jacob ends up out of the land of promise of Canaan at the end of his life in Egypt because God did tell him to go down into Egypt. And it was arranged by his son Joseph, who roundabout ended up down there because God orchestrated it. It was a crazy story. And Joseph is there, and he prepares for the severe famine. And Joseph had become very dear to Pharaoh, the king. And Pharaoh made him second in command only to himself. And as he prepared everything for this drought, this famine that God showed him was coming, and he became very dear to even the Egyptian people because of his provision they lived. And so Jacob and the rest of them goes down into Egypt, and he dwells there until he dies, and the children of Israel stay there for 400 years. And we read over that and we think, okay, 400 years has been several thousand years ago. That's more time than we've been a country, our own country. That's a long time to be in the land. And so they're there and they're multiplying. And this is where we first find them called Hebrews, and really for the first time is in Exodus, which I think it might have been Abraham might have been referred to that as once, but they're called the Hebrews, and we see this in Exodus, and in Exodus is where we are introduced to this next hero. 400 years after Jacob goes down into Egypt, the Bible states that during that time, another Pharaoh rose to power who did not know Joseph and had no loyalties to Joseph, and neither did the Egyptian people. And he noticed how the Hebrews prospered and they multiplied and they were becoming a great people. And he recognized something about them. He recognized that they prospered because of these people. Why do I say that? Because the Bible tells us that he was worried that they were going to become great and not overthrow Egypt and take over Egypt, but they were going to become great and leave. He did not want them to leave because they were prospered because of them. So what he did to try stopping this is his solution was to enslave the Hebrews and make their life so hard that maybe they would no longer prosper. But that didn't work. The Egyptian taskmasters worked them as hard as they could, and they made their lives miserable. And the Hebrews, in spite of all that, kept multiplying and prospering, even under the whips of oppression. So Pharaoh comes up with another plan. And his plan is to kill all the newborn male babies when they're born. And once he tries it through the midwives wouldn't do it, and God blessed him for that. So then he just makes an order, makes an edict or a command that if you have a male child, you are to take that baby and cast it into the river. Whew. Boy, you see this little baby my daughter's holding. Can you imagine any mother doing that? Oh, I imagine if they was found out, they would take the baby and they would take it upon them, the soldiers would take it upon themselves to do this. But his plan was to kill all the male babies. And maybe he thought that they were the ones who's going to be strong and be able to overthrow, but that wouldn't keep them from multiplying. Last time I checked, if you have one bull and 15 cows, you can still make a herd. I think he went after the wrong ones, but that's just my thought. Anyway, sorry. He orders that if they're male, be cast in the river. So this is where Moses comes into the picture. And we get an overview of the life of Moses in the book of Acts. I'm not going to go through it all in Exodus. It'd take too long. But in the book of Acts, we see a spirit-filled man who was appointed by the apostles as a deacon in the early church. And he worked in the power of the Holy Spirit. And Stephen, he's in the open square and in the public, and he's preaching and doing great works among the people. Acts 6, chapter 6, verse 8 says, "And Stephen, full of grace and power, was performing great wonders and signs among the people. But some men from what was called the synagogue of the freedmen, including both Cyrenians and Alexandrians, and some from Cilicia, and Asia, rose up and argued with Stephen." Kind of sounds like a debate. "But they were unable to cope with the wisdom and the spirit with which he was speaking." So when they were unable to make an argument back to Stephen with any valid points to the wisdom that he had, they conspired against him. And ultimately, they end up succeeding in getting him violently killed. Sound familiar to anybody? This is not a political jab about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, because it wasn't a political assassination that he died over, but a martyrdom of one of the most influential Christian men of our day. It was done by someone that was wicked, who cannot make a responsible argument for the insanity that was shoved down everybody's throats. And that's the way it works. The wicked always resorts to violence when they haven't got a rational leg to stand on. It was true 2,000 years ago, and it's still true today. If you can't make a rational argument for something, don't resort to violence or name-calling and things like that. Just accept your defeat if it doesn't make sense. So Stephen gives his defense before the council that ends up getting him stoned. In his defense, he gives an overview of Moses' life when he's standing before the council before he's put to death. And it says, "It was at this time that Moses was born, and he was lovely in the sight of God, and he was nurtured 3 months in his father's home. And after he had been set aside, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and nurtured him as her own. Moses was educated in all the learning of the Egyptians, and he was a man of power in words and deeds." So Moses is born of a woman, and she does obey in her own way, and she puts him into the Nile, but she puts him into a little boat, and his sister Miriam kind of follows it to see what happens. And he's discovered in the river by a lady who wants a little baby, and it's none other than Pharaoh's daughter. She takes Moses into her house, and she makes him her son. And there's all kinds of theories about why Pharaoh might have allowed this to happen. Might have been politically, might have been because his little girl wanted a baby and couldn't. I don't know. I don't know why Pharaoh had allowed it, but what I do know is that he was brought up in Pharaoh's house. He was educated in Pharaoh's care. He becomes a man of power in words and deeds. He was living in the finest conditions of his day. This guy has got it made. Then something happens that changes this man. I believe it broke him. I believe it made him usable for God. Stephen goes on to say in Acts chapter 7, verse 23, "But when he was approaching the age of 40, it entered his mind to visit his brethren, the sons of Israel. And when he saw one of them being treated unjustly, he defended him and took vengeance for the oppressed by striking down the Egyptian. And he supposed that his brethren understood that God was granting them deliverance through him, but they did not understand. On the following day, he appeared to them as they were fighting together, and he tried to reconcile them in peace, saying, Men, you are brethren. Why do you injure one another? But the one who was injuring his neighbor pushed him away, saying, who made you a ruler and judge over me? You do not mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday. And he knew that he had a call in his life to deliver the Hebrews. He knew this somehow. I believe there's evidence that he had a relationship with his Hebrew family. And I think there's other parts that I'm not going to get into today, but I believe he knew who his family was. And most likely his real God-fearing parents had revealed to him that he would deliver them out of the oppression of the Egyptians. Because it sure wasn't the Egyptians that told him this. So he got it from somewhere. So this powerful man sees one of his brothers being mistreated or beaten by an Egyptian. And so he kills the Egyptian in cold blood and hides the body. And it kind of looks like that he kind of had an anger problem at this point. And he supposed that the Hebrews would recognize him as the deliverer. Did you see that? He supposed that they would understand because they would see that he was the deliverer. It looks like that Moses at this point thought that he was the man. He thought that they would see, don't you reckon I'm the deliverer? That's who I am. Well, looks like a little bit of pride to me. But instead of them recognizing him as the deliverer, they only see him as the murderer. In Acts chapter 7, verse 29, it tells us that this remark, Moses fled, at the remark of what this other man said. Moses fled and became an alien in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons. After 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai in the flame of a burning thorn bush. So at 80 years old, he's at the back of the desert. While he's trying to play peacemaker, one of the Hebrews throws up the murder in his face. They throw him up as they throw the murder up in his face, and it says at the remarks of the Hebrew, Moses fled. He got out while the getting was good, and he becomes a fugitive. And we know that Pharaoh did indeed hear about it. In Exodus 2:15, it says, when Pharaoh heard of this matter, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So I figure he must have pursued Moses and tried to kill him or something else, but it was at the words of this guy, and this guy may have even been the one that went and told Pharaoh. I don't know. But irregardless, Moses fled. He becomes a fugitive. And he stays gone for a long time. 40 years pass, and he ends up out in the desert caring for his father-in-law's sheep. And he sees this burning bush where he encounters God. And God voices that he will indeed deliver the Hebrews through Moses. But you know what? Moses isn't the confident, proud man that he once was. He's keenly aware of his faults and weaknesses. He's become humbled because of them. In Numbers 12:3, it tells us, now the man Moses was very humble, more than any man who was on the face of the earth. He's a very humble man at this point. What made him so humble? Well, he's had 40 years to examine where he was raised and the decisions that he made that got him there. He'd probably seen the opportunity that he'd once had that had been laid out before him and how he had messed it up. I mean, he probably thought, God put me in Pharaoh's house so that maybe I could rise to the throne or whatever and deliver my people. And I screwed it all up. He made the wrong decision killing the Egyptians, and he was incapable. The man was incapable of saying the right thing to bring unity to his fellow brothers, and he abandoned his call and is now a simple shepherd of sheep that's not even his. He's just someone that keeps sheep for his father-in-law. Now we know Stephen tells us something that's very interesting, and I had never seen it until I read it there when I was putting my message together. He says that Moses spoke with power. That's what he says. Moses spoke with power whenever he was in Pharaoh's house. Exodus 4:10, though, tells us what Moses says about his speech and reveals something to us. Then Moses said to the Lord, "Please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither recently nor in time past, nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." He can't even speak well anymore. And matter of fact, even when he could speak well, he didn't see good results from it. He couldn't bring unity to these guys. He didn't have the right words. And he is a stuttering person that's really slow to speech. So he's lost all confidence in his ability that he once had. He's learned that he's no longer the confident person. And this has humbled him to realize that maybe he wasn't that hot shot after all. And his anger-filled violence and his proud justification for doing what he did now looks like a terrible mistake. And he probably feels like he messed up the whole plan of God. You know, I've been there myself. I knew when I was a young teenager that God had a call in my life. And I did all kinds of bad stuff. And I just thought, well, I messed it all up. But what I've come to understand is God knew what a knucklehead I was going to be before he ever called me in the first place. And God knows the mistakes and the flaws that you're going to make before you ever make them. And he still calls you. He knows that when he calls you. There may be a reason for it. So what does God do at this point? Does he say, "Oh, Moses, you know what? You messed things up"? No, he doesn't do that. Instead, he empowers him. He empowers him with power like he'd never had before. Because now in this humble state, that he understands that he's really just another person. There's nothing any more special about him than there is anybody else. God can trust him. He knows his weaknesses, and God can trust him with that power, and he gives Moses this amazing power to do these great things. He gives him a spokesman, even though God had told Moses, first, if you read the account, God told Moses, "Did I not make that mouth? I can let you speak." He told him he would take care of it. But Moses still couldn't believe, and by God's grace, he gives him Aaron to do the talking for him. God, he overlooks, or he shows us grace in those areas that we need it. And that's what he did for Moses. He gives him Aaron. So God is with him, and Moses leads. If you read the account and you add up what they tell you come out of Israel, they only give you men. And that's it. They don't give you the families or anything. And many Bible scholars says it's probably right around 6 million people that he led out of Egypt, and all their cattle. They had all these cattle they had with them and all their goods. And he led all these people out, and they get to the Red Sea, and they're trapped. And God, that he parts the Red Sea, and he makes a highway through there so they can cross on dry ground. And then he destroys the army of Egypt when it closes the water around him, all by the power of the staff that he tells Moses what to do with. And then God gives Moses the 10 Commandments. And God feeds and he protects and corrects through Moses, these people. Then we see Moses do something that displays his humanity. And guess what? He's just like we are. Even after all this. Even after all this, he still does something that, any one of us might be guilty of. This is where we find the rest of the story. Numbers chapter 20, verse 1, it says, "Then the sons of Israel, the whole congregation, came to the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Now Miriam died there and was buried there. There was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron. The people thus contended with Moses and spoke, saying, 'If only we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why then have you brought the Lord's assembly into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die here? Why have you made us come up from Egypt to bring us in this wretched place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there water to drink.' Then Moses and Aaron came in from the presence of the assembly to the doorway of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to them, And the Lord spoke to Moses saying, and I'll get to that in just a minute. So what happened here is the people are complaining again. They're complaining again, and this time it's because there's no water. They're saying, we wish we had died when the others did before the Lord. Egypt was such a wonderful place. Isn't that crazy? This is mostly I want you to understand, this is mostly the generation, the next generation, because their parents, who are mostly dead now, had accused Moses and God of leading them out. And when they accused Moses and God, they said, you have led this assembly. You and your God has led this assembly out here to die. But this time, the next generation says, you have led this assembly of the Lord. We are God's people. They have come to understand that they are God's people, but Moses is the selfish leader that has forced them there. He said, you made us come out. He forced them there is what they accused him of. They accused him of being out of God's will to make them come out of Egypt. And they were actually accusing him of the same selfish motive that Pharaoh had over their parents to control them for selfish gain, is what they were throwing at Moses and Aaron. But even still, we see that Moses and Aaron fall on their faces before God, and they intercede for the people because they've seen what's happened before in the past and people being consumed for doing this. But God speaks to them with instructions. And this is a wonderful thing about our God. And He doesn't hold things from the parents to the children. You're your own generation. You're your own people. You're your own person. In Numbers chapter 20, verse 8, it says, take the rod, and you and your brother Aaron assemble the congregation and speak to the rock before their eyes, that it may yield its water. You shall thus bring forth water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation and their beasts drink. So Moses took the rod from before the Lord, just as he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock, and he said to them, listen now, you rebels, shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came forth abundantly, and the congregation and their beasts drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you have not believed me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. So God told Moses very specifically to speak to the rock to bring forth water. Some say this was supposed to be a typology of Christ as an illustration, and that's for another study. So if you look it up, you'll find the stuff about the typology of Christ. But I personally think that he wanted them to understand that there is power in what you say. He wanted them to understand what you speak has power. And those before them had spoke their own doom to die in the wilderness. They said, we are going to die out here. And they did. They spoke it themselves. And that's what they got. Every adult except for Joshua and Caleb that left as adults from Egypt died in the wilderness over that 40 years. They spoke that over their own selves. God just said, okay, here you go. So Moses, what does he do? He acted in anger again. He lashed out in anger. We see this in his reaction to the congregation. First, he insults them. He said, listen now, you rebels. He calls them all rebels. And we go around, we buy motorcycles and T-shirts, and we say, we're a rebel. But that's not what this is in this culture. That's not what this is at this time, because this is something that they have been hearing about and observing for 40 years. They understand that they are wandering around because the rebellious people are disgusting to God. He's disgusted by them. So this is an insult to say, God is disgusted with you. It wasn't at all what God wanted them to think of him. It wasn't what he was trying to portray to this next generation. That was their parents, not them. He didn't want them thinking of him like this. He wanted them to see him as their gracious provider that could overlook their shortcomings, that he would still take care of them, one that loves them even though their faults, even with their faults, with no ulterior motive, which is holy love. That's what he wanted them to see and understand. He wanted a different kind of relationship with this next generation, and yet they did not display that. Instead, he lashes out in anger. He strikes the rock twice because he's mad. And God's not happy about it. God tells him you can't go into the land of Israel with them. So what caused, let me just pause here and let me ask the question, what caused Moses to get angry? What was he so angry about? Well, the first verse in this chapter gives us a clear timeline. It tells us right before this that Miriam, his sister, dies here. This would have been the 39th year of the 40 years that they wandered in the desert. They had been wandering for 39 years at this point. 39 years of following the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. 39 years of victorious battles. 39 years of miraculous food from heaven, manna. 39 years of supernatural healing. 39 years where nobody had to replace any clothing or shoes because they never wore out. All the men are happy about that, and women would say, I'm tired of looking at these same shoes. 39 years of Moses' solid leadership. 39 years of him interceding for them to God. 39 years of them watching him go into the presence of God and walking out with the glory of God on his face, that they could not stand to look at him and he had to put a veil over his face. 39 years of this testimony. And Moses had to endure 39 years of mumbling and complaining despite all the good things he had done for them. God, through him. Moses, I believe, was offended by the critics over his leadership. It was very clear when in anger he says, shall we, who? Him and Aaron, bring forth water for you out of this rock. It is apparent that Moses was offended because he thought he deserved better than this, and he displayed that by saying, I have the power to do this. Shall we do this for you? Why did he feel like he deserved better? Because the most humble man on the earth still struggled with pride from time to time. And that's what happened. Something I have learned is most offense that we have is actually based out of pride. Every time I have been offended, when I examine why, it's because I feel like I deserve better. Why do I think I deserve better than anybody else? Why do you think you deserve better than anybody else? Why I don't deserve that? Why not you? Really, think about that. Jesus told us to bless those who curse us. Shouldn't we be unoffendable if we're walking in the power of God? Shouldn't we be able to forgive and not be offended? No, we battle with our pride because we think more of ourselves than we should. And I think this is where Moses is at. He goes, hasn't my track record showed you this way, you ungrateful people? Why would you treat me this way? Because of pride. But regardless of this battle, regardless of his failure, we see what happens with Moses. He said, I'm not going to allow you to go into the promised land with the people. And he did not. But he did get to go into the promised land. We see him there in this land in Matthew chapter 17, verse 1. It says, 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white light. Must have been an amazing sight. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. So instead of God remembering his failure and God holding that against him, we see him here with Jesus and Elijah, at the transfiguration of Christ. And it's such a profound thing that it's recorded in 3 of the Gospels. And Peter even talks about it. And he's given the high honor of being there with the Messiah representing the law. His anger and pride did not keep God from using him and honoring him with the appearance in these 3 Gospels. So this morning, I guess the thrust of my message, I don't ever write a closing. I probably should start writing a closing, so I know where I'm going with it, and pray about it. I don't know, but I guess the thrust of my message here is that many times we battle with the same things that we once battled before. Many times we battle with pride. And one of the things that we should take away from Moses' life is that you realize that God empowers the humble. He gives the humble power and authority because he can trust them with it. It doesn't mean they're not going to fail from time to time. And it doesn't mean that God recalls his gift on your life. As a matter of fact, what happened when Moses was disobedient and struck the rock twice? Water still came out. God still supported his leadership, even though he was wrong. And our God, he's a gracious God, and he forgives. And he looks at the things in your life, in your past, and looks at the things that you struggle with. And in his mercy, he shows grace and says, I can use you as long as you know that I'm the one that you're relying upon. And that's what Moses had realized. So this morning, I want every person that's got a pride problem to come to the altar. No, I'm not going to do that. That's that. If you've got a problem with pride, lift your hand. And all the people that don't raise their hands are the people that have a problem with pride. That'd be kind of a setup, wouldn't it? This morning, if you have a need and you want me to pray with you, I'll be happy to pray with you. The Bible says if you have an illness, or to come to the elders of the church and let them anoint you with oil and pray the prayer of faith. I believe God is still the God that heals. And if you have any need at all, I want to invite you down here and let me agree with you in prayer. And we'll believe God is going to meet your need.